Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Robert Lindsy Milne. Before I bring him on, a couple of announcements. You can always get new episodes free on Rokfin, Odysee, and all podcast platforms. Check us out on Rokfin. This is where you're going to get our premium content. You get our regular shows and all the awesome content from every creator on Rokfin. Check out all the podcasts that we feature on the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We just dropped a brand new one, FKN Crypto, hosted by Cory Hughes. You can get those all on our website. That's forbiddenknowledge.news. Also follow us on Facebook. Those links are all in the description. And check out what may be the most powerful antioxidant known to man, C60 Purple Power. The benefits have been personally amazing, but check them out for yourself. Click the link in the description and you can get 10% off your order plus free shipping. Today I want to welcome back to the show Robert Lindsy Milne. He is a psychic intuitive counselor, teacher, healer, and life coach. He is recognized across the continent as one of the most insightful psychic intuitive counselors of his time. At a very young age, he started doing readings at the Cozy Tea Room in Toronto, and at the same time battling serious literacy issues. He managed to overcome his disabilities and travel the world giving insight with his psychic intuitive sessions to tens of thousands of people. Robert, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and I can see you're doing pretty good too.
Oh, yes, I'm doing excellent. It's been a great couple of years. It's great to have you back on. It's been a while since we've last spoke, and we really live in a completely different world than when we last spoke as well. And I really want to get your thoughts and insights, not only into, our global situation that's happening now, but our collective consciousness and, the growth or decline of consciousness, with whatever way you see it, and the possible timelines that we could be heading down. But like I said, Robert, it's been a while since you've been on. I'd love for if you could remind the audience, how this all started for you and how you first discovered your abilities.
Wow, that's a big question. I have been a professional psychic for 56 years. I started working at a tea room full time when I was 15 and a half years old, and I was at the tea room doing readings. And it was the way I got off the streets because I was homeless at the time. So going back a little bit, I also survived on the street using my intuitive and psychic abilities. I knew in those days I had that sense or that awareness. Going way back to say like when I'm 5 or 6 years old, one time we lived in this old house but by the way, I'm really not big on connecting with spirit and stuff. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not. The only thing I'm saying about it is I don't want to do it. Okay, that's the only thing I want to say about it. I just don't want to do it, but I believe it. So when I was quite young, my mother used to send me downstairs to get her cigarettes. Can you imagine a 5-year-old going into a store today and say, give me a packet of Rokfins, please?
It's different time.
It certainly is. And I would feel energies in the house. And I could sense beings there that weren't. I didn't want to make friends with them. I didn't want to know them. I just knew that they were there, and I didn't much like being around them when I was alone. So anyway, one time I came home from school. I was about 6, and I said to my mother, "Grandma Harris died today." And in 1955. By the way, my grandmother, my Grandma Harris actually was my great grandmother, and she lived in England. And in those days, it was still in those days when somebody left the old country and went to the new country or the new world, they never went back home again. That was still going on, and it was very difficult to make a phone call across the street, let alone across the continent. And so, time or news traveled slowly. So I come home from school. I say to my my mother, "Grandma Harris dies today. My mother freaked out, yelled and screamed, probably hit me for saying bad things. The next night at dinner, my mother says to my dad, Grandma Harris died yesterday. And I thought my dad was going to get angry with my mother for saying bad things. And to my astonishment, they talked about it and everybody was cool. And I didn't understand what had happened. And throughout those early years, I would say things and get hit for and not realizing why I was getting hit, especially when the adults were talking about it or doing it. And it was very confusing.
Now, whenever you first started to pick up on, you said, energies, this wasn't a spirit, was it? This was just kind of intuitive feelings, or was it?
Well, it could, sure. It would, yes, it was. There was that energy there, those vibes there. It was a converted mansion. It was called the McLean Mansion, and there were a lot of different energies there. I've gone back in that location a few times as an adult, and I recognize that there were several energies or entities there.
So you chose basically not to just work with spirit. You chose to work with your intuitive senses.
I didn't want to work with them at all.
I guess you.
I didn't want. I didn't want to do any. I didn't want to give up control of anything. Still don't. I didn't want to give up control of anything. And even at that young age, I knew I had this ability, and it was for my protection. I knew that. I wouldn't have been able to say it. But I guess it was like a duck going in the water. It doesn't know it can swim, but it swims. It was kind of like that. When I was about 9, my father took me to a Stanley Cup semifinal game. It's hockey, right? And I'm in Toronto, and it was the Toronto Maple Leafs versus the Boston Bruins. The series was tied 1-1. And this particular game was tied 1-1, and they got to the end of the third period, and then they go to the first overtime period. And so remember, I'm 9 years old, and we're at Maple Leaf Gardens, and it holds 18,000 people. And the teams come on the ice for the first overtime period, and they kind of have a little stretch, and then the referee blows the whistle, and the regular guys. And when they were just kind of warming up, I knew number 17 with Toronto Maple Leafs was going to score. And that was Gary Eman. I knew it. The game hadn't even started, but I knew he was going to score. And then it got to the point where he had scored. And I was seeing that in my mind, but the reality is that the game hadn't started. Anyway, the teams go to the bench, and Eman was not a starting player. He was sitting on the bench when the game started. Just as the referee was ready to drop the puck, the lights went down in this building, and it was completely silent. I couldn't hold back the feelings that Eman was going to score. So I jumped up and started yelling and screaming and cheering, and the game hadn't started, and the entire building looked at me and my dad. And he just put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Sit down." And I did. And anyway, the referee dropped the puck, and a couple of minutes later, Eman jumped over the boards, and somebody passed it to him, and he tipped the puck in the net, and the whole building erupted. And it was my beginning of the awareness that I was different, and that I saw things differently. And that's how I discovered it. And I also knew that I was going to do this in some way for the rest of my life. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew I was going to be doing, using that.
Now, do you get feelings about not only future events, but maybe people or things that could be maybe bothering someone physically or mentally? Absolutely. Or with their health?
Oh, absolutely. I sense, so when I do a reading for somebody, I see their life from most of the time, from conception to completion. I see. Now it's more like a feeling than a vision, but I know. And I don't see details of how they were conceived, and I don't actually see details of how they die. I'm just aware of that energy starting and ending. And throughout someone's reading, I'm going back and forth, but I don't spend that much time at either end. Actually, in my podcast that just was launched tonight, or the 10th one, my mentor was on, and we were talking about doing those types of things way back in the 1970s. We learned how to do a psychic body scan, and we would, but remember, that was unheard of in 1975. So we were doing body scans. We would go into a light alpha state and visualize the person's body in front of us, and we would see the different areas of their body that may be in line or out of line. We'd see the different energies. And incidentally, I just remembered we started doing that in the 1970s when I was talking with my mentor on my podcast, and this brought all this back. And I realized that I used those skills when I was working on the book, The Perfect Predator, with the guy that was in the coma, and I had the mental link with him. I learned those skills way back there in 1975, 76. I just realized that right now, by the way. So yes, I can. It's not something that I'm really big on. Mm-hmm. I'm not that. One of the reasons that I can't take it very much farther than I see something going wrong. There's not much more I can do, and there is not much more that I would dare try to do.
Right.
And the reason for that is because I have no experience in medicine. But if somebody's got a problem, say, with their lung, I have no problem seeing that lung being dark or being black or being red or being blue or whatever. I have no problem doing that. And when Tom was in that coma for 8 months, and when I was describing what was going on with him, I would describe what I thought his pancreas would look like. I just knew it was a pancreas, and I would describe it as, this is turning a purplish color, and there's a big brown spot here, but I had no idea what it was, and the only way I found out was the scientist that I was giving the information to gave me the logical information after I was doing the psychic things.
Yes. Now, this we spoke about this last time. This was a coma patient that you helped. Could you remind the audience a little bit more about what happened in that situation? That was a very fascinating story.
And there's a book written called The Perfect Predator about it. I'm going to condense it as much as I can. So one of my clients of over 30 years, and I can tell you their name because they wrote the book and their name's in the book, right? The first one, her name is Stephanie Strathdy. She is a Torontonian. And the first time she came to me for a reading, she had just gotten her PhD in epidemiology. And now Stephanie is a professor of epidemiology at the University of Southern California, and she is an associate dean of the Department of Epidemiology at the University of Southern California. Her husband Tom has a PhD in experimental psychology and a PhD in psychiatry. And he also is a professor at the same university in experimental psychology, as well as an associate dean. So like these people are in the big time thinkers. They've been my clients for a long time. Stephanie and Tom decide they're going to go away on another wonderful vacation. And they decide that they're going to go to Egypt and see the pyramids. The year before, I did a reading for Tom. And Tom, when I describe Tom, I think of an older Indiana Jones kind of guy, because he was like 6'5". He's been a researcher. He did research in South America and got kidnapped by the Sandinistas and just about starved to death, but survived. And he's had this really wild, almost book-like life. Like an adventure story life. And he's a pretty cool guy. But he had ballooned up to over 300 pounds. And he stopped taking care of himself. And, that sometimes happened. So I did a reading for Tom the year before the vacation. And I told Tom that at such and such a time, he was going to lose more than 100 pounds. And one of the things that I do when I do readings, one of the techniques that I have when I'm giving somebody a reading is when I have to tell them something bad, I tell them the ultimate end result of the bad thing that happened first. So I tell them how they're successful. That's how I do it. And then I come back to today, and then I give them a little glimpse of, like, if it's a really disaster, then I'll just give them a little glimpse of what could happen. But then I would also talk about, the end result. And then each time I come back to it, I just make it a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, just so that they don't go, oh, fuck, and panic. And if I do it gently, they can control it. So I told Tom that there was a disease, an illness coming. No, that's not what I said. First of all, I said, in such and such a year from now, you're going to be more 100 pounds. You're going to weigh less than 100. You're going to be 100 pounds less than what you are now. And you look great. You're doing good. And then I come back and I say to him, however, before that happens, there is a really serious illness. And it's so serious, you will not be able to get closer to death and not die. But you will survive, and you will lose more than 100 pounds. And then I said to him, I'm not sure which one's the destiny. I'm not sure if you getting sick and losing 100 pounds is your destiny, or losing 100 pounds. I think, though, if you pay attention and you lose the 100 pounds now, you might miss the illness. And then I said to him, it's up to you. You can do it the easy way, or you can do it the hard way. But just remember, you will survive. So I had told, it scared the shit out of him, by the way. And for a couple of days, I lived on salary and, salads and stuff. And then he went back to his old ways. So anyway, Tom and Steph go away on their dream vacation. And it was coming up near Christmas. It was in late November, December. And they go through one of the pyramids. Tom gets sick and has a problem with his abdomen, and I think it was his pancreas. They had to carry him out of the pyramid, and they went to the hotel first, and the doctor came, and then the doctor said, we got to get you to the hospital. He got rushed to the hospital. In the hospital in Egypt, he contracted the most potent super virus on the planet. And that super virus was 100% antibiotic resistant. That meant if you get this bug, you die. That was the result. Mm-hmm. And he was going into a coma in Egypt. So anyway, they had great insurance. Tom gets medevac. Tom and Stephanie get medevac to Germany, and they get medevac to this clinic that's, the best in the world, or best in that part of the world, dealing with these things. And Tom was put into complete isolation. As I said, he was in a coma. All the medics around him were in hazmat suits, and again, he was in a coma, and they just basically believed he was going to die, and that there was no hope. Stephanie called me. This happened and she called me early into the first week of Christmas. And I had the worst flu, man. I could hardly get out of bed. And she called me on Skype, and I crawled out of bed and answered and said, "What took you so long? I've been waiting for you." And well, actually, that was true. And then we started talking about Tom. And in that time, Stephanie was just told you he's going to die. And Stephanie decided that before he died, I had told Stephanie that she had all the ability, all the skill, all the experience to find a cure for Tom. She had it, she could use it, and she could do it. And she decided that she was going to give it a try. But, her husband was dying of this superbug. And she was looking for a cure. And Tom was in a coma for 8 months. He went into septic shock 7 times, came out of it. I had a mental link with Tom 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I knew what was going on with him all the time. Now, I knew what was going on with him in Germany when he came back to California. I knew what was going on with him then. I felt it. I knew when he was getting sick. I knew when he was getting strong. I knew when something was going wrong in his body. I couldn't tell the doctor. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't tell Stephanie what it was, but I could describe it. And it was many times during that time, I started saying and getting information a few days before the doctors were getting it. And there were 3 different times that Tom was ready to let go and die. And it didn't show up on the machines. It showed up in his unconscious mind, which they never considered that he was conscious at all. And indeed, he could hear sounds. He could sort of process, and he had an awareness, but he was unconscious. There was this one time in Germany, and what I had done is the way I imagined how his strength was, is I visualized very much like a candle behind me. And I thought of his energy like a candle, and the flame was his life force. And when the flame was burning, strongly, I relaxed because I knew his life force was strong and he wasn't going to die today, or, he wasn't going to die right now. And I knew it because the flame was very strong. When the flame would flicker, I would know something was going on. And then, start looking for it. And then I'd be telling Stephanie. And believe me, there is like 100,000 doctors involved. I'm not doing, this, hocus pocus medicine. My job was to know what was going on with Tom unconscious. That's all. Nothing to do with the medical part. So I knew he was, because the flame really was flickering. I thought it was going to go out. And I said to Stephanie, Tom needs to see his daughters. Yesterday would have been a good day. Today would have been a good day, is a good day. Tomorrow's not so good. And if you wait any longer, don't bother. His daughters were living in California, and Stephanie just said, okay. And his daughters arrived that night, and they came on with hazmat suits, and they came over to him. And I knew that they were there because I watched the flame get stronger, and I knew that they had showed up, and so this is a pretty spectacular thing. There are many people alive today that could have done the same thing. There are some brilliant psychics. I really want to say that. I was lucky. My number came up, I was standing in line. They called my name and I went up to bat. That is what happened. But there were other people that could have done, they would have done it differently. but they could have done it as good as. So I just really want to say that, I'm not just the only one. Okay, do you want me to stop now, or keep?
Well, no. Well, ultimately, just what
Anyway,
happened with Tom?
Oh yes, Stephanie found the cure and treated, but it went right down to the point where he was like 5 hours from death before he got treated with the cure that Stephanie had found for him, and he was injected with phages. And he got stronger, and he, like the next day he came out of a coma, and he's alive now. It's been several years since that happened. They've written a book, and they just are in the process of signing a movie deal.
Wow, that's great. And I'm guessing he lost that 100 pounds as well.
He certainly did. And by the way, the first time I got to see him and talk to him when he was conscious, and I looked at him, and what I said is, "Hey, Tom, I know an easier way to lose 100 pounds."
Right. Yeah.
And we both laughed.
Now, whenever you see, these future events or possibilities, do you think that these are something that's set in stone, or is it just possible timelines that could occur?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. If something can be seen, it can be changed. Destiny cannot be changed, and it cannot be seen, because if it could be seen, it could be changed. So if I see something, there is a probability that on that timeline, that person will experience this. And I'm pretty good at doing that. Except that at any moment in time, if I say to somebody, "You're going to be driving on the I-90 and you're going to hit a lamppost on Friday," whatever, and the guy says, "Okay," and he finds himself on I-90 at that date, and he says, "Oh shit, Milne said this," and the guy gets off I-90. He could do that.
Yeah.
If it were destiny, I wouldn't have told him, and he would hit the pole and get wiped out. So when I give information, the person can accept it and stay in that timeline, or choose to do any other possibility. And I'm a behavioralist in my thinking. So when you have one way of doing something, you have three. Because when you have one way of doing something, you have the exact opposite. Because that's also the purpose of life, is to experience. And what we do one way, we must do the opposite. And what we are one way, we are the exact opposite. So we have free choice and free will. But when you have a way of doing something, you then have the exact opposite way of doing it. And you can do that. But when you have two ways, you actually have three. Because you have this way, the exact opposite, then somewhere in between. And that's a reality. But let's hold on to your chair here for a moment. But somewhere in between doesn't have to be in the middle. Somewhere in between could be over here or over here. So when you have one way of doing, I love it. You're thinking, I love this. It's great. So if you have one way of doing something and you open your mind, you could have three. We saw that, but you could have six, because somewhere in between isn't in the middle. Doesn't have to be. So you could have 6 ways, or 12, or 24, or 48. Was it next was 96, and it can go on to infinity. Mm-hmm. That's called enlightenment.
And that kind of brings me to the point that the more individuals I talk to, like yourself, intuitive psychics, people who do remote viewing, have these conscious abilities, the more I realize it's probably something that we should have, that we've always had, that our ancients had access to, that our ancestors had access to, that we just lost somewhere along our history.
We didn't lose it.
Well, maybe forgot how to access it in some way.
Right. But we haven't lost it. And we, even if we don't know we have it and we use it. Mm-hmm. In my first podcast, one of the things I talked about was can anybody be psychic? And the way I described it is, probably not. Not everyone can be psychic, but if you think of a bell-shaped curve, and at one end of the curve, there is one person that has absolutely zero awareness, like zip. And then the bell-shaped curve, you go around, there's another guy or woman at that end, and is 100% total awareness. And then the rest of us are somewhere in between. Now, our instincts, our intuition, our psychic ability, almost everybody has been thinking about someone one time and the phone rings or an email comes in and it's that person. Like for example, just before my publicist booked this show, I was thinking about you, and the next day booking came through on my email. Like, wow, isn't that interesting? Now everybody does that. Yeah. That's being psychic. Or have you ever been somewhere and all of a sudden you look up and you see someone's been looking at you or is looking at you? Mm-hmm. That's being psychic. Or if you've been looking at somebody and they turn and look at you, that's being psychic. So that's the beginning. And that is what just about every human has. And actually just about every mammal, because that's an instinct that most have. And it's what causes us to survive. It keeps us alive. And we often follow our instincts, even when we don't know we're doing it.
And how would you best describe this kind of conscious connection to everything that would enhance these, what some would call psychic abilities or intuitive mm-hmm. abilities?
So what we're talking about with our intuition, our psychic ability, is our feelings. And that's where it comes from. So scientific way. So I'm not putting down the scientific way, but the scientific way is a different part of the brain, and it's sequential thought. It's logical. These psychic things or these intuitions are conceptual as opposed to sequential. They're instinctive, not logical. So they're two different parts of the brain. And it's really hard to describe it in an analytical way because it's not tangible.
Right. And I've heard
it's also something that you can't repeat 100% of the time. You can't duplicate it the same way every time. Now, you don't have to be smart to be psychic. You don't have to be smart. You can be really stupid and be a psychic. But of course, there's not very many of those. So getting in touch with feelings and emotions, our intuitions, we all can do that. The smarter we are, the better we express it and the better we identify it. But here's the thing that's really cool about this. It's difficult for me to do a reading for somebody that is somebody that would be living on welfare, living that life, and having that mentality, and being. I just really want to be careful because I'm not putting anyone down. Somebody who grew up in social housing, poorly educated, not evolved. I would really have a lot of trouble doing a reading for that person because I would have trouble relating to where they're at. But there are people that are similar, And they do the same psychic work in the way these people can understand. So there is someone for like us, for everyone, but one of us is not like that for everyone.
Now, I want to get your insights into what's going on in our world today, what's going on in our collective consciousness. Sure. There's a lot of collective fear, but there's two sides. There's different timelines, I believe, occurring at the same time. There's people that are, a group of people in this world that are, living their lives in fear, and it's affecting all, everything around them. And there's this group of people who aren't really affected by it. And I think that these two timelines, they could converge some way in the near future, and I'm wondering if you could get your thoughts on that.
Okay. I have some. I actually started thinking. Sorry. I don't know what happened here. Anyway, I have been doing a little bit of thinking because my publicist told me that some of these shows, you guys want me to do that. So I put a little bit more time in. My focus, and has mostly been this for me in my life and in my work, is the person in front of me. I can't solve world hunger. I can feed the poor guy that's on the corner. I can't heal all the sick. I can help somebody get to a doctor. So I'm focused on what I can do in front of me.
Right.
So that's the way I see the world more so. But what I have been seeing is that for several months in 2022, and starting in the first week of January, like the 4th, 5th, it's going to start getting really intense. I'm talking about your country right now, but the whole world in general. The pressure of the good guys against the bad guys, and it just depends on who you're talking to. Yeah. The pressure is just going to get greater and greater and greater. Those that are and those that are anti, and that plus politics will continue to build. But that's going to be all around the world and not just focused on your country or my country for that matter. Although we'll be less involved. So peaking late spring. And my belief is that things are going to erupt, get intense to the point, and everybody's going to get frightened and then step down or step back. And as we're into late May, it's like the balloon popped and the energy came out, or the air came out. So late spring of 2022 is there's going to be like a burst of energy, and it'll frighten people, and they'll take a really hard look at what they're doing and step back and step down. Intense, the intense anger, instead of it being furious and want to hit the guy in front of you or shoot the guy in front of you or whatever, the energy will be taken down a notch, and they'll just be really pissed at one another, but not being violent.
Now, this is something that you've picked up on just intuitively?
It's the only way I would.
Yeah. And, approximately when did you start, just picking up on these feelings of these energies?
When I knew that I was going to be on shows for this time of the year. And when this time of the year is over, I'm not going to be thinking about that very much anymore. And right. There's lots of reasons, and I have no issue with what anyone else does. I like to work in areas that I can see the results of my work. I want to help the person in front of me. I want to, the person that fell down, I want to help them up. The person that's sitting at the corner begging for money, I want to give them enough money so they can have the day off.
Now, when
and I do that. I do that.
When you're doing readings most commonly,
Yes.
what are some of the most common things that people are coming to you for readings about?
Most people are coming because of feeling insecure about their life, how it's going. Most times people come to me when they're in crises, they're going through something. What often happens when they come to me, and my area, I'm really fascinated in behavior. That I am a behavioralist, and I'm really into that. So when people come to me, it turns out that what they think the problem is, there's 3 or 4 other ones as well. And that often comes out in the work I do. And ways of getting out of those issues happen, or those problems, in the readings that I do. And often I'll talk about, so mine is more of a inner healing and getting a better job, having a better life, getting along with your wife, your husband, your children, how your children are going to be, how your work is going to be. That's stuff that's really turns me on, actually.
Now, these
Yes.
things you can immediately sense whenever you first meet a person.
If I wanted to do that, I would.
Mm-hmm.
I would, but I don't want to do that. And I have to shut down. What happens when I do readings, and I'm still doing them, I've slowed down. I only do around 400, 450 a year now, because I got a bunch of other stuff to do. When someone comes to me for a reading, either online or in person, I don't ask questions in the reading. And when I sit down, I do ask, how old are you? What month is your next birthday? And then I just start to talk. And in that time, I talk about the person's life, where they're going, what's happened. And most of those major issues come to the surface and get dealt with. And one of the things that gives me incredible joy, and I am really proud to say I am really good at this. When people come to me, they're afraid, they're freaked out, they're panicked, they can't see beyond the moment, and they come to me and their faces are all tense, and their eyes are all strained, and they're scared. And as I do the reading, and as I'm talking with them, I see them relax. I see their eyes get clear, and by the end of the reading, they're feeling safe. They're feeling in control. They're feeling like they're going to make it, and it is the most beautiful thing. It is just the most incredible thing.
That's really great.
And I never get tired of it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, for sure.
Yes.
Now I want to go back to just for a second to a little bit of future predictions after this kind of period of turmoil that you predict in 2022.
There will be a new administration in the White House after the next election.
Interesting. Now, do you see any better times than we're in now, that things will kind of go back to, I don't want to say normal, I don't think they'll ever go back to normal, but some kind of state of stability?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by stability. what
It's
I
hard to
would
tell
need-
these days what that
what
is.
what I'm very confident in saying is that in February of 2023, so a year and a month from now, people will be walking around without masks as a general rule. Everything will be open, and we will be back to the openness we're used to. Because of what's gone on in our societies, both, in North America, our way of interacting and relating with one another is become different. And where the real issues will be happening is when the children that are 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, when they get to be about 18 or 19, there's going to be a lot of problems with that generation. That's about the worst. What does happen coming up to the end of next year is like what I said is in late spring, very early summer, there is some kind of uprising, and it scares everybody, and everybody backs down. And then they lower the intensity and then start to get along. So what I'm seeing is the energy becoming gentler.
Yeah.
Now that's what I'm saying. Okay. Then in February, the country, the border here between your country and mine is open freely. Nobody's really forced to wear a mask. You don't have to say you have a vaccination. We will be back to trading and buying things and going places and doing all that, or we'll be able to.
Hey, that'll be something very good to look forward to.
Well, and it's happening.
Tell us about your podcast, My Side of the Crystal Ball.
It's My Side of the Crystal Ball.
Yes.
And it's a lot like a late night talk show rather than a podcast. And it's 3 segments. My podcast is only an hour long, and there are 3 segments. The first one is WWRS, and that's what would Robert say. And I take a topic and I talk about it. And I talk about for about 15 minutes, but lately it's only been about 9 or 10. And I talk about ways of looking at life. I talk about one was recently in WWRS is when you know something's going to happen, but not when. You can't control when it's going to happen, but what you can control is how you're going to experience it. And then I go into a talk about you have free choice and free will. And then I say, well, no matter what you do, you're going to experience it. You do nothing, you're going to experience it. Or what do you want to get out of it? So I did a whole talk like that. And then there was one where I talked about what trust is and how it's built and how to identify it. And then another one, I talked about how to be psychic. Actually, I was only supposed to talk for 15 minutes and it went on for 50 and it made it into 2 shows. So that's WWRS. The second segment is called The Expert's Chair, and it's 15 minutes long as well. And it's somebody that's really good at their field, and it's a short, concise interview. It's really cool. And then the third segment is a half an hour long. It's called The Main Event, and it's a more in-depth interview. And that's the way the podcast is. It's fast-paced, and there's music, the intro, and there's music between each segments and things like that. So it's like a late night talk show, and it's all about being growth, positive things. It's all about evolving, being psychic. I've had
it sounds like you're helping
guests.
People coming into their awareness as well.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope
really
so.
Great.
Yeah, so that's what I've been doing.
That's great. Do you have anything interesting upcoming that you'd like to kind of give a teaser about?
Well, right now, today, the 10th one was just released. And my mentor from 45 years ago. He's on my podcast. And instead of having 3 segments, I did a WWRS, but it was only 5 minutes. And then I spent the whole time talking with my mentor from 45 years plus. And we talked about the beginning of the new age and how it happened and how it became mainstream when just a few years before when I was started working at the tea room when I was 15, there was nowhere else for people like me to work. Your kitchen table or a tea room. There was no possibility of getting ahead. There was no way you could have a company or a job doing this because it was illegal. There was no, and from that to bringing it into mainstream. And we talk about those early days and how he and I and many of us opened the doors for that new era. It was really quite fascinating.
Wow, that's really cool. Well, Robert, thank you so much. People can find your podcast on all podcast platforms?
Yep. Yeah. YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and pretty much any other place where you get your podcast. You can also find me on my website, www.robertlindsymilne.com. And you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Catch this one, TikTok too.
There you go, a TikTok. All right. Yeah. I still haven't gotten on the TikTok, but I'm everybody's getting on there. I might have to check it out one day.
Yeah.
All right, Robert.
I'm doing it now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. That was fantastic as usual. We'll have to talk to you again, of course, in the future.
Maybe you'll come on my show.
Oh, that would be great.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert. We'll talk again soon. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening.